from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The Smoky Mountains are well known for beautiful sweeping mountain vistas and, of course, the American black bear. But did you know that the park is also known for its amazing biodiversity? There are over 130 known species of land snails in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They play an important role in the local ecosystems, both in life and death. As decomposers, they help break down living material on the forest floor. In death, their shells provide much-needed calcium for other animals like birds that need the mineral for eggshell production. The book, Land Snails of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and Southern Appalachians, is your guide to finding out more about the land snails in the Smokies. Hope to see you in Great Smoky Mountains National Park real soon.
Hello, welcome to our session called Heroes for Young Readers. Our authors today are Rita Hubbard and Frye Gaillard and Marti Ross. Well, I've lost Marty's last name here, Rosner. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoy our presentation. We also want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, the Nashville Endowment for the Arts, the Dollar General Literary Foundation, and the Nashville Scene, Parnassus Books, and Vanderbilt University for being sponsors of this part of the Southern Festival of Books. This is an interesting way to present this because we're used to being in the library with you all and talking to you, but we hope you enjoyed this presentation about these two books. These books are books for young people, and they are about history, and they're about particular people in history that have caused a change in our society and culture, or are representatives of someone that could be a hero to young people. Let me tell you real first, our presenters today are Rita Hubbard. Rita is a retired special education teacher for 20 years. She writes books for children, highlighting unsung African Americans who are heroes in their own right. Her picture books include The Oldest Student, How Mary Walker Learned to Read, and Hammering for Freedom, the William Lewis story. She owns and manages the Black History Channel, a website celebrating Black business, books, and culture, and is an intermittent book reviewer for the New York, my page doesn't turn here, Journal of Books. She is also Tennessee's representative, or our nominee for the Library of Congress book author this year. The other two authors you'll be hearing from are the authors of The Slave Who Went to Congress, and they are Frye Gaillard. He's a writer in residence at the University of South Alabama and author of more than 30 books, including Journey to the Wilderness, War, Memory, and a Southern Family's Civil War Letters, The Books That Mattered, Go South to Freedom, and A Hard Rain, all published by New South Books. He's the winner of the Lillian Smith Award, the Clarence Carson Award for Nonfiction, and the 2016 Eugene Current Garcia Award for Distinction in Literary Scholarship. In 2019, Gaillard was awarded the Alabama Governor's Arts Award for his contributions to literature. Marti Rosner has been an educator for 41 years. She has worked as a classroom teacher and district academic coach, serving Title I schools in Cobb County, Georgia. She has also enjoyed leading a variety of professional development classes, serving as a teacher consultant for the National Writing Project, and training teachers across the country as a curriculum specialist for Sundance Newbridge, an educational publishing company. This book is her first book. So we are going to do this kind of format today. First, Miss Rita is going to talk to us about her book. She'll tell you a little bit about herself and how she got involved in this writing. And then we will let Frye and Marti talk about their book. And then we will take questions from the audience. If you have questions, please send them by email. There'll be a link on your screen that you can send them to. And we will discuss those at the end of our presentation. All right, Miss Rita, you are on.
All right, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Rita Lorraine Hubbard, and it is my great pleasure and honor to be here. I am a native Chattanoogan. I'm a former special education teacher of 20 years, and I'm the author of 2 picture books, which are like my babies. One is Hammering for Freedom. That one debuted in 2018, and this one we're going to be talking about today is The Oldest Student, How Mary Walker Learned to Read. I'm going to read you an excerpt from the book, but first I want to give you a summary of Mary's life. Mary was born a slave. She experienced the wonder and terror of emancipation. And the reason I say terror is because she, like most other people, were not ready for it. It was welcomed, but it was a new experience because she had no resources, no clothing, no food, no shelter, but she was free. So there was a wonder attached to it and a terror attached to it. She enjoyed and experienced the joy of marriage and motherhood, the long, grinding hardship of Jim Crow laws, the sudden hopelessness of being all alone after she outlived her entire family, and then finally, the hope of reinventing herself, like many of us have, by learning to read and starting all over again. So here's the cover, but I'm going to pick you up at the point where Mary has outlived all her family. She had a husband and 3 sons. She had a long, grueling life. And because life presented itself in a way that she never had a chance to learn to read, her sons had been reading for her. And I hope I'm holding this correctly. Her sons had been reading for her, but as life often does, life gives us a lot, but it takes a lot too sometimes. So I'm picking up there. When Mary was well past 90, she and her husband sat in their creaky rockers while one or another of her sons read to them. After the 2 youngest boys died, the eldest read. Then Mary's husband died. Several years later, her eldest son died. He was 94. And I want you to take a look at this picture of Mary staring out of her window. Because, and notice something else. Notice the words on the signs. Actually, they're scribbles. Mary had outlived her entire family. She was 114 years old and all alone. Can't read, she said, can't write. I don't know anything. Mary stood at that window of her retirement home and gazed down on the world below. Words were everywhere, on billboards, on buildings, on store windows and trucks. She sighed. All this time, she thought, and they still look like squiggles. But Mary was about to reinvent herself because Mary had heard about a new reading class held in her building. She pursed her lips. No more waiting, she said. Time to learn. Out of her apartment, into an elevator, and down to the lobby she went. When the elevator doors sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbor walked up to her. "That's a reading class, Miss Mary. Can I help you over?" And there's the neighbor trying to be helpful. But Mary was in the process of reinventing herself. So she shook her head, gripped her cane, lifted her chin, and walked straight toward that sign. And this picture here was my favorite part of this book, my favorite part of writing this book, because I know the effort that she put in. For the next year and more, Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy. After all, she was the oldest student in the class and probably in the entire country. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. She studied the alphabet until her eyes watered. She memorized the sounds each letter made and practiced writing her name so many times that her fingers cramped. She learned to recognize sight words and then challenged herself to make short sentences with them. She studied and studied until books and pages and letters and words swirled in her head while she slept. I'm going to try to give you a little close-up if I can. I'm not too great at this. Can you see how many times she practiced writing her name? One fine day, Mary's hard work paid off. She could read. Word of her accomplishment traveled, and people everywhere celebrated with her. And you can see in this picture, Mary's a little bit of a celebrity. But I want you to notice something that may be even more important. Notice the sign over here by the birthday table. It's no longer squiggles, it's words. She can read now. And this is a part that I really love too. Remember that picture of Mary standing in the window looking out at the street when she could not read the words? Well, she's back at the window. Mary felt complete. She still missed her sons, but whenever she was lonely, she would read from her Bible, or she looked out her window and read the words in the street below. From then on, Chattanooga's honored Mary's achievement with yearly birthday parties. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson sent well wishes on Mary's 118th birthday. And in 1969, President Richard Nixon did the same. Mary was 121 years old. And this picture, I'm about to read you that page, but do you see that plane? And do you know who's in that plane? Mary is in that airplane. Mary received many gifts over the years: a radio, a sofa, her very first television, a new Bible, the key to the city, and perfume and champagne from the Canadian Mounties. But she also received something that brought back those long days in the Alabama cotton fields, her first airplane ride. From the cockpit window, Mary gazed at the trees and rooftops below. No different than a horse and buggy, she joked, but she knew it was. As the airplane dipped and soared like those swallow-tailed kites of long ago, Mary decided that flying was a lot like reading. They both made a body feel as free as a bird. And there is Mary enjoying her celebrity and the freedom of knowing how to read. She has indeed reinvented herself. Each year before her birthday celebration, came to an end, someone would whisper, "Shh, let's listen to Miss Mary." The shuffling and movement would fade away until not a sound was heard. Then Mary would stand on her old legs, clear her old throat, and read from her Bible or her school book in a voice that was clear and strong. And when she finished, she would gently close her book and say, "You're never too old to learn." And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Rita. That was wonderful. That's a wonderful story. How old was she when she died?
She was 121 years old.
My goodness. She was quite a lady, wasn't she?
She was, and an inspiration also. Yes.
Now, I know you're an educator like I, but what inspired you to write this book?
You know, when I was in 4th or 5th grade, which was a long time ago, our classroom went to a field trip to the Mary Walker Foundation. There was a very small foundation that had been established in her honor. And I remember the tour guide saying that she was freed at 15, but she learned to read when she was 121. And even at such a young age, I always wondered what took so long. What happened between this point where she was set free and this point where she learned to read? What happened to slow her down? And I never forgot the story. And once I began to really delve into writing picture books, I went back and picked her story up. It took a little bit of research, but I found out what happened. Life happened and circumstances happened. Yes.
This I tell my students at college that it's most important that they read and that they read carefully. They still don't believe me, however. It'll come to them perhaps before 121, we hope.
Yes, hopefully.
Yes. All right, are we ready for our next presenters? There they are. Hello, Frye and Marti. How are you all?
Hi, Judith.
Great. Hi.
I sort of introduced you all. Let you add some things about yourselves and then talk to them about your book. All right, you're on.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, let me just say Rita's story is just absolutely amazing. I didn't know it. And so those kind of inspirational stories are good for kids, no matter what their background is. It's that story of determination and perseverance and taking control of your own life and, overcoming obstacles. It's very powerful. It's interesting how easily and naturally, I think it kind of segues and relates to the subject of the book that Marti and I have done, which is called The Slave Who Went to Congress. It's about the Benjamin Sterling Turner, who was the first African-American congressman from the state of Alabama. He was elected in 1870 during early years of Reconstruction, 5 years after the end of the Civil War. Benjamin Turner was born enslaved, spent the first 40 years of his life that way, but always dreamed of being free. And he sort of instinctively knew or believed from the very beginning that if he could learn to read, that would be something that would help prepare him for freedom when that day came. And he always believed that it would. Mm-hmm. And so at great risk to himself, because it was illegal for slaves to learn to read and they could be punished severely for it. But he managed to teach himself to read. And when the Civil War ended in 1865 and he was free, he immediately plunged into the civic life of Selma, Alabama, where he lived. And in 1870 was elected to Congress on a platform of racial equality. He wanted full citizenship rights for former slaves, the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to go to school with other children, no matter what race they were. But he also ran on a platform of racial reconciliation. He thought that white and black people needed to pull together and rebuild a broken country after the Civil War. And so he stood for that as well. And we regard him as kind of a forgotten American hero. I had not ever heard of him till I was working as a journalist in Selma, working on a story on the civil rights movement there. And his name came up, and I was embarrassed that I'd never heard of him. So we have written this book about him. The illustrations by our illustrator, Jordana Haggard, are beautiful, we think. But I'm going to ask Marti to read a couple of excerpts from the book, and you'll get a sense of Benjamin Turner's life.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting to me, again, the perseverance and the determination of Mary and Benjamin Turner. They're so similar. And when she talked about her wonder and her terror at emancipation, we talk about that a little bit through Benjamin Sterling Turner as well. So I'll read a little bit and I'll try and show the pictures as best I can. 40 long years I lived as a slave, 40 years, mere property, thought of as nothing more than the mules or horses or furniture. I've been told my life growing up in Selma, Alabama was a privileged life, as there were others who suffered more than I, but I would argue that no man is privileged when enslaved. Even at the age of 5, I knew my place. Yet the desire, the yearning for an education lived in me as an illusion, an idea that would come alive on what I called the reading mornings. I hope you can see that. Can they see it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
On reading mornings, my curiosity would get the better of me as I crouched hidden by the parlor door watching, listening to the magic of my owner, the widow Mrs. Turner, reading with her children. Reading mornings were priceless to me as they opened the gift of possibilities. I felt I'd found heaven when the children's nurse, a young slave girl, took me into her confidence. She had learned the alphabet from the mistress's children and taught me all she knew. I found books and newspapers from which to practice my reading and hid them, lest I be discovered. It would be a hard road if my efforts were found out. Through sheer determination, I carried on. It took years of stumbling over the printed word. The New York Herald and the New York Tribune became my friends. Listening became ever more important to me. Anytime there were political discussions which could affect my fate, I was there, the ever-efficient servant, listening and learning. So, through his life, he was threatened when he was caught with a book. But he also was sold and was able to work, taking care of a hotel. He married, and he lost his wife because she was sold. And then on January 1st, 1863, an amazing event took place. President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation declaring all slaves in Confederate states free. It was then I permitted myself a sense of hope, one of which I'd never dared speak. And here is President Lincoln signing that Emancipation Proclamation. And then, when Union General James H. Wilson's army overtook Selma in April of 1865, I was reminded of the cost of freedom. Soldiers destroyed anything useful to the Confederates. As I stood in the doorway of my livery stable, the general charged up to me, looking down upon me from atop his horse, pistol pointing. Our eyes locked, and he shouted, "The Union needs these supplies, and I'm here to be sure they get them." And with that, his soldiers commenced taking from me all I had worked so hard to gain. My mules and horses, my carriages and feed, all gone. And this is one of my favorite illustrations, the look in his eyes. Let me see if I can get it in there.
It's there.
Yeah. Once again, bitterness and resentment were set aside in the name of freedom when Wilson called for colored volunteers to support emancipation. I gathered a regiment of men and became captain of Company A, 11th Alabama Volunteers. I saw little action, but much destruction, including several of my livery animals dead along the road. Once again, a grim reminder that freedom is not free. With the surrender of the Confederate Army, I returned home to Selma and set about rebuilding my business. I now understood my emancipation meant more than being my own master. It meant walking the road to a freedom where the rights of all former slaves would be a respected matter of law. For the time being, though the chains of slavery were unlocked, we remained tethered. We were free in the eyes of the law, but still enslaved by others' beliefs. In 1870, several leading citizens of Selma, both black and white, urged that I run for Congress. They had written a letter to a local newspaper expressing a high opinion of my abilities. It was humbling to be held in such regard. My reply explained my stance on the issues. My campaign slogan would be universal suffrage, universal amnesty. And here he stands, speaking to the people who want him to be their representative. Some of my constituents were surprised by my opposing punishment for those white neighbors who fought valiantly for the Confederacy. But they too had suffered immeasurably, and I felt they should not be further punished. I favored the right to vote for all former slaves. I believed in mixed race schools so every child could achieve an education. Of vital importance, the unreasonable tax on cotton must be refunded. Its burdens were unfair to colored farmers who had struggled longer and labored harder than any people in the world. I further urged the federal government to buy and set aside land for these families to purchase, upon which they could build new lives for themselves. I was filled with hope. My opponent, Democrat Samuel J. Cummings, was a prominent white man, and although I was opposed by many whites, I had the support of the larger portion of the district, the freedmen. When the votes were counted, I had defeated Mr. Cummings soundly. I thought back to those magical reading mornings when my dreams of an education and freedom first took flight. And now I, Benjamin Sterling Turner, would take my seat as a free man in the halls of Congress, not only as a proud representative of the people of Alabama, but the first of my race to do so. I would do my best to bind the wounds of war and uphold the rights of all. And that's the end of the story.
So, Judith, do you have questions for us, or should we talk more with Rita? What do we do next?
All right. Well, I do have a question for you all. It came in from somebody that's watching. It says, I was wondering if any of the text in Rosner's book was from his speeches that were not permitted to be spoken in Congress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of it is taken directly from his speeches. Some of his, a couple of speeches survived in the Congressional Globe, which is a record of what congressmen had to say about issues. And it's so striking how unbelievably eloquent he was. He was a brilliant man, obviously, in addition to being a very determined man. And so his words survive, even though his white colleagues, fellow members of Congress, refused to actually let him speak on the floor of Congress. So a further slight that was visited upon him just because he had been enslaved, and yet he continued to persevere and to set down his thoughts for the historical record. And it's an amazing thing to read his powerful words.
Well, Marti, I know you know when I talked about you, you are an educator, yes. Did that inspire you to write this book?
It did. And the story itself, just being able to do the research and finding out more about him, that's what drove me to want to learn more about him. And the more we read his words about him, you know, I saw the voting record, the actual voting record where he won that election. I felt like his story needed to be told. It just needed to be told because there are too many people who don't know who he is. And even though I am not an Alabaman, I felt that Alabamans need to know about him.
Well, it's not, the whole country should know about him.
Well, that's true, but in particular, because
from Alabama.
Yes.
Well, it's a very interesting story. And of course, he had the perseverance that Mary had as well in learning to read, just in a different situation. Didn't take him quite as long.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Why don't you all talk amongst each other about your books and why you think that it's important for children to have books like this, to our young adults, you know, to have a book like this to inspire them to be successful.
Rita, do you want to go first with that?
Sure. First of all, I enjoyed that. I really did. And I've already written it down so I can go to my library and check it out. I would really love to hear that story. Or I'd really love to see it for myself. And the illustrations are just beautiful. Yes. You know, one thing I want to say before I answer the other question about sharing it, you know, maybe with older audiences is once a picture book lover, always a picture book lover. I'm looking for the richness, the vibrancy, the expression. When you showed the picture, the close-up of his eyes, I felt that. I connected with that. So I just wanted to say congratulations to that. And I think the question was how we share these books with the community. Was that the question, Judith?
Yeah, well, that will work.
Okay, well, let me say this. I am a former educator also, and I'm often contacted to share my books with, from K through 12, and then with some, they were called Future Teachers of America. So there's no age limit, really. What I do is I do a presentation from whatever angle. For example, I was going to be showing or reading the book to some high school students. So the angle that I came from with them was the angle of when you have something you really desire to do, something that drives you, but life puts something in your path to slow you down or send you that way. And could they relate to Mary in that way? Not the fact that it was a picture book, but can you relate to how you have a goal in life and then you blink and 10 years have gone by, or you blink again and then 20 years have gone by. So I do the presentations from different angles, but I'm actually contacted to talk to from K all the way that way.
We have been as well. I was going to say, and we have spoken with teachers at a conference one time, and there was a gentleman who came over, and he was a high school teacher, and he was buying the book for his class. And I know exactly what you're talking about, Rita. When once a picture book lover, always a picture book lover. My education was with young children. I taught 23 years in the classroom before becoming a district academic coach and a literacy specialist. And I worked with first and second grade before I worked with kindergarten all the way through 12th. And I still love my picture books. And I have two beautiful grandchildren who live with me, and I constantly am throwing picture books at them, so I understand. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No, that's good. No, one of the things too, Rita, is that sometimes if you think about teaching young readers, teaching hard history is a kind of tricky thing sometimes. I mean, slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all of that is hard for young people because it's so manifestly unfair. But if you teach that through stories of inspiration, somehow they can come to an understanding of the unfairness and the hard part, and yet it's softened a little by these amazing people like your subject, Mary, who triumphed over that, even though it was hard, and the realities of it must have stung and must have been very depressing. And yet she never gave up. I mean, learning to read at 116 is just, it's an amazing thing that, people of all ages can relate to. And then you continue with this, and you can sort of tell the story in slightly different ways, as you said, depending on the audience. So, when we talk to high school students about this, we talk about the missed opportunities in Reconstruction, for example, how you had these African-American members of Congress who offered this vision of racial justice and racial healing that the country didn't listen to at the time. There was too much pain, too much racism, whatever it was. So you can kind of add to dimension to the story as you go, and yet the core of it remains the same.
And most of our audiences have been adults. Sometimes the adults will bring children, grandchildren. We have been in some elementary schools as well, but it seems like the adults appreciate the richness of the story, but also the illustrations and what they add.
Well, I will say this too. I get a lot of tweets from around the country from adults who purchased the book and are so excited to, number one, be able to show children a little bit, kind of introduce them to slavery and what happened without it being too harsh, as you all said. But I've had adults write me and say, I bought this book for my grandfather who's in a nursing home because I want him to know life is not over. You can start over. It has been so amazing to me to see the hope that it has given a lot of people of all ages. It's been very exciting to me. And one more thing, if I may add, I'm still a little bit of a newbie to the picture book world, but I am learning how to manipulate where I want the facts to be. And most of the time when there are facts that are a little bit too much for very young children, you can always put that in the back matter, because the children are looking at the stories and the picture, but the back matter. I've had so many parents write me and tell me, thank you for explaining certain things in the back matter, because I was wondering. But if I had left it at just the picture book, they would not have known the true depth of the story. So those are some things that we can do to tell the story and the triumph in the manuscript, and then in the back matter, disperse with the facts, those facts that you feel are necessary. That's what I've learned.
We have one more, the gentleman who had a question. He said the power of reading both books show this. Can you talk about that? I think that's true, that these books show how important it is to be able to read, because I try to stress to my students, they're college students. Now, I've taught everything from second grade through senior college. And right now I have these wonderful little college students that are community college kids. And, you know, I often show them My Fair Lady, which is another thing I think to show students. But, well, I had an administrator who thought that was odd. And I said, well, you know, it says something, because I said to them, look at this and tell me, what's the power of language? You know, if you want to be, you can change your entire life by being able to read or to write or to speak properly. It changes your whole concept of who you are and who society thinks you are. Don't you think? What do you think, Rita?
Well, I do. Speaking specifically to my book and the power of reading, what I see with the young audiences that I talk to, because I've done quite a few Zooms on this, I see the connection that they make. It's truly amazing. They see the words on the book, that's fine. They see the words on the page, but the power of reading is so amazing because they make that connection. Some of them have had things to present themselves. Some of them have had to put off something that they wanted to do, even though it wasn't as big as what Mary was trying to do, and it didn't last as long. But what I've seen is it's so powerful that the children are embracing her. It's almost like they think she's their grandmother, and they're embracing her and rooting for her. They're cheering for her, but they're also cheering for themselves. See, I've seen that, even though they don't tell me that, they're cheering for themselves. Hey, this might take a long time. You might have been struggling with reading or math or sight words or whatever you were struggling with, but she did it. Grandma Mary did it, and I can do it too. And that, just that reading, that connection, and identifying with it, that is such a powerful thing. It really can shape your life and sort of guide you along your path. That's what I've seen.
What do you think, Marti and Frye?
No, I just amen to what Rita said. It's I think reading can take you places that you actually don't go physically. You know, it can take you to times that you didn't live in. It can introduce you to characters that you have not met personally, and it makes all of that come alive in your mind, your imagination, your heart. And so it unlocks whole worlds and enriches your own life in the process. So it's fun to be involved in doing that with young readers, but recognizing that this is a lifetime gift.
Yes.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your books with us today. I'm sure you have inspired a lot of people to run right out and get copies of them to share with their students, their families, their grandchildren, and children and whatnot. And again, thank you all so much for doing this. And thanks to the Southern Festival of Books for sponsoring you all. And we hope we see you again next year.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for being here.
And I'm going to get your book.
And I'm going to get yours.
Yes.
Yes, and I hope they're going to send me the copies of it. We'll all share books. How's that?
Sounds good. We'll make sure.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.